Hello and welcome back to our series of videos about the efferent division. We're now on to our last topic here, the somatic motor division. Okay, I want to start by reminding you of the structure of the efferent division and sort of its function. Remember that the efferent division is carrying signals out from the central nervous system to various target tissues in the body. Okay, so far we've been focusing on the autonomic division, which is going to carry out our kind of control our internal state. Okay, but now I'm going to focus on the somatic motor division, which controls our voluntary muscle movement. Okay, so let's start by looking at the circuitry of the somatic motor pathway. It is very, very simple. It's just one neuron that leads from the central nervous system to the target, which is skeletal muscle. Remember that the somatic motor system is going to control our skeletal muscle, our voluntary muscle movements, okay? At the synapse with the skeletal muscle, the neurotransmitter that is used is acetylcholine, and the receptors that are used are nicotinic receptors, okay? One thing that I want to say about this pathway is that these neurons can be super, super long, okay? So these motor neurons are originating in the motor cortex, which is part of our cerebral cortex, the outer part of our brain. Okay, and then they're going to extend all the way to whatever skeletal muscle they're going to control, which means that the skeletal muscles in our toes are going to be controlled by neurons that originate in the brain. And if you think about that distance, you can imagine that that axon is going to be very long. It's going to extend the entire length of your body. Pretty crazy. Okay, so the interface between this motor neuron and the muscle target is called the neuromuscular junction, okay? You can see that a motor neuron can branch at its end to control one or more or many skeletal muscle fibers, okay? And we have a name for that unit, the unit that is the motor neuron plus all of the muscle fibers that it innervates. That term is motor unit. So we'll talk about that some more in our muscle unit, which is coming up next, okay? So motor units can vary in size, like you can have one motor neuron just controlling a few muscle fibers, or you can have one motor neuron controlling like hundreds of muscle fibers. And we'll talk about kind of the significance of that when we get to our muscle unit. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the neuromuscular junction. We're going to start by looking over here at the upper right. Okay, so here you can see that axon terminal coming from the motor neuron. And what I want to point out here is that the place where the motor neuron interfaces with the muscle fiber, that region of the muscle fiber has a special name called the motor end plate, okay? And then if you look over here to the left on the bottom, you can see kind of a blow up of that motor end plate. There are a couple things that I'd like to point out about its features. One is that it has many folds in it, right? So you can kind of see that in this figure here, as well as in this figure here. So it's got lots of folds, and it has lots of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, okay? Okay, so let's take a look at, well, I guess it's synaptic transmission at the neuromuscular junction. So synaptic transmission on the presynaptic side is going to be the same as what we saw in the rest of the nervous system. You're going to have an action potential come down. That's going to depolarize the membrane. That's going to open voltage-gated calcium channels. That's going to let calcium come in to the motor neuron, and then that's going to trigger neurotransmitter release by exocytosis, okay? Let's talk about what happens on this end here on the skeletal muscle side. So when the skeletal muscle receives this neurotransmitter signal, we have opening of these nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. That's going to cause ion movement across the membrane, okay? That's going to cause a depolarization of the membrane. And then the muscle fiber itself is going to have an action potential. We're going to talk a lot more about the details of this in our next unit, which is muscle. But for the time being, just suffice it to say, we're going to get a depolarization, which is going to lead to an action potential in the muscle fiber. And then that action potential is what triggers the contraction of the muscle, okay? Another thing I'd like to say about this process is that the control of muscle contraction is tonic. There's only one output signal, which is the motor neuron, okay? And it's either gonna tell the muscle to contract or not to contract. Well, it's not really gonna tell the muscle not to contract. It's gonna tell the muscle to contract, or it's not gonna tell the muscle to contract. So there's no signal that tells the muscle to relax. It's just contract or no command, okay? And this is gonna have implications for how the muscles are arranged anatomically in our bodies. I'll talk about that more when we get to our muscle unit, which is next, okay? But thinking about that, you can see how it would be very important to break down our neurotransmitter in that synaptic cleft. Because if we don't break it down, we're just going to have continued muscle contraction, and we don't want that, right? So that's where this enzyme comes in, right? So we talked about this enzyme when we talked about synaptic transmission. Acetylcholinesterase breaks down the acetylcholine here in the synaptic cleft so that you can have an end to your signal to contract your skeletal muscle, okay? All right, that basically wraps up our efferent division unit. If you would like to, you can watch the next video, which is basically just summarizes everything, so there's no new information in it. But we will cover muscle in much greater detail in the next couple lectures. Okay, see you later. Oh, sorry. There.